right, we can get started. I think we're thinned out because of the weather, maybe, or some other reason, but we'll do what we can tonight, and those who can watch online can watch online. So, as always, I want to open in prayer, so let's get started with that. Well, Father God, we thank you, as always, for all those who have traveled here tonight. Lord God, roads are not particularly favorable, but we do thank you for the health and safety that you have brought us here, Lord God. And anybody else who's still en route or in any way at risk in their driving, Lord God, I just pray that you'll be with them, help them to get here. And we pray for those who may have chosen to stay home and watch online tonight or some other time. We just pray for them. Lord, bless them as they are faithful to gather in your truth and continue to discover all that you have for us, Lord God. We just pray that you'll devote this time to our minds and our hearts, Lord God. Help us to learn and grow in you and to give you honor and praise for the way you've taught us, Lord God, to honor you in creation and how your perfection, Lord God, is just available and visible to us in everything we see. So we give you thanks for tonight. Ask you to bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, yeah, we are in this kind of somewhat technical section here. We started, we went through the philosophers last week. Philosophers, that if you've studied philosophy at all, you certainly have heard of Immanuel Kant and David Hume, and you've got to see where their theories led to, which is, you continue to see those who want to suppress the truth, those who want to reject God, always come up with some way to explain away why you shouldn't believe what your eyes can clearly see. And you saw that with, Immanuel Kant, right? And you look at the tree out the window, and you can't trust your eyes whether or not what you're seeing is real, which is kind of funny because if I take a picture of it and I look at it a year later, it's like it still looks like the same thing to me. My mind seems to be lying to me with the same exact image as it saw a year ago. Or if I go out and I chop it down and I turn it into this pulpit, it's interesting that suddenly now I can actually put things on that tree that I couldn't believe was real before I cut it down. All those kind of just strange philosophical viewpoints on things. And then we looked at the attempts with the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith, to deal with kind of the cosmological argument, and they had that SURGE acronym. As I said, I think the author, first off, the book's over 20 years old now, and I think the authors, that's not their area of expertise. I'm not claiming that it's my area of expertise, as if I'm a PhD scientist or anything like that, but I have studied that topic with a lot of passion and interest, and reading books and watching lots of things online for many, many decades, almost approaching 3 decades now. And I just didn't find the SURGE approach to be all that descriptive of how the cosmological argument works. But we looked at it, and we looked at both mathematics of it in terms of you can't have an infinite universe, because if you have an infinite universe, you can't get to today, you can't add something new to infinity, and all of those kind of thought exercises that they had in there. And then I finished off last week with something that didn't come out of the book, and that was this introduction to the anthropic principle, where it talks about, or the anthropic principle, which is not invented by Christians, not coined a term invented by people of faith. It's just a recognition by lots of scientists, secular atheistic scientists, that say, isn't it just strange that the earth that we live on and everything that supports the earth that we live on, meaning the sun, the moon, the stars, all that, and all of the vastness of the universe, as well as on our own planet, somehow seem to be perfectly tuned to support life. And so not just life, but human life. Okay? And so that's why they call it the anthropic principle, like anthropology, the study of man, is the anthropic principle. It's this sense that every single thing in the universe has a design, has a razor edge, sometimes we call it fine-tuning of a whole bunch of parameters that just don't seem to be accidental. And the most interesting thing about it is most, if not all, of those factors or parameters that we see in the planet, if you change one, dozens or maybe even 100 of other ones kind of also change, and makes it that much more complicated, compounding probabilities of all these things fitting. So in chapter 4, we are going to see some of this as well, what we actually refer to theologically, if you will, or just as a argumentative approach or a scholarly approach to things. call it, well, first we'll look at these two topics tonight, really. Divine design and the first life, okay? And so the divine design fits into the category of what is referred to in scholarly terms, teleological argument. That may not be a word you've used in your past or you're all that familiar with, but teleo is in Greek the last or end of something, okay? And then, the ology or ological, the kind of statement is always the study of. So it's really the study of the end of something, the end result of something. You can also think of that teleos argument. It is where we do get the root word, if you like, for telescope, meaning you're looking through a telescope, you're looking out far in the distance, right? You're at one point here and you're looking at the distance. And so this is looking at, hey, we not only do we see evidence for a beginning of the universe, and a beginning requires a beginner for something to begin. You can't get nothing out of, or something out of nothing, right? You have to have a beginner or some beginning force or premise or God who created everything. Now we're looking at the very other end of the spectrum, and we're saying, as we look at the world we live in, there seems to be design in anything and everything that we look at. And so we call it the teleological argument because we're looking at the end result, not of evolutionary processes, but looking at man. We're looking at our solar system. We're looking at all kinds of aspects of the world that we live in and saying, it seems highly unlikely that what we're seeing is anything other than intentional design. Sure doesn't look like an accident. Sure doesn't look like explosions. Sure doesn't look like just chemicals all just kind of randomly came together and somehow this is the end result of it. It looks so designed, and hopefully you'll see that as we go. So the authors, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, look at this, and they have their own anthropic principle points, and we'll look at some of those. But it's really based on this argument, and last week we kind of covered this. Hopefully you caught the understanding of the author's meaning of explaining. Very traditional. This is not their own invention. This is just common logical thinking, logical argument. Make a premise, make a conclusion. Hopefully that started to sink in a little bit because unfortunately, and I don't know for how long, but probably at least all of my lifetime, so more than 50 years, schools, whether it's undergraduate or whether it's elementary schools or high schools or undergraduate schools or all the way to the top, most schools do not build their educational process on teaching people to think. They build them on teaching people what they want them to think, right? They don't. We're trying to help everyone who's studying this to learn how to think so you can make a conclusion for yourself. If you remember, that's what the authors said they wanted to do. Start out from scratch, tear down every presupposition, every thought process, and start from the beginning and say, okay, we're not going to assume anything yet. We're just going to look at what we can see and gain from that experience. And so we looked at, again, with the cosmological argument, looked at everything that was caused to have a beginning had something that caused it, right? And therefore, the universe had a cause, or God was the cause of the universe. It seems to be the most logical argument. And this one, again, back to teleological or anthropic principles, here's their two premises followed by this single conclusion. Okay? And again, remember, premises are not statements of fact. They're statements that if you accept this, then the conclusion naturally flows from that thought. Okay? So you could well, let's walk through it. So every design had a designer, right? You can expand that for a moment. Every building had a builder, okay? Every car had a car maker, right? We look at it and say, every one of these things has this, okay? So every design had a designer. That's premise one. Premise two, the universe has a highly complex design that we can observe, test, and measure. Number three, therefore, the conclusion is the universe had a designer, okay? Now, you can challenge premise one, that every design has a designer, or you can challenge premise number two, that the universe had a highly complex design. But if you accept premise one and premise two, then the only conclusion we draw is that the universe must have had a designer. It seems it's the logical outcome of those two statements. So again, you could take premise one, and you can go try to find every object you can find in the universe, anywhere, everywhere, and say, does it seem to indicate to me design, purpose, intentional outcome, or does it just indicate nothing, random, no purpose, no organization? Could have just as easily have come about by accident. Somebody dropped something on the floor and it broke into something beautiful. Or you put dynamite into something and it explodes and it turns into something beautiful. Or a bunch of accidents happen and it's just, cars get into an accident out here on the road with the snow on the road and it turns into something beautiful. Is that what we normally experience in life? Okay, so you have to test that premise on your own. And the universe has a highly complex design. We'll talk about that here in a moment. The authors will add on to what I spoke last week on and help all of us to see, the universe that we live in seems to have this incredibly, highly complex design. And if those two premises are true, then the universe, the right logical conclusion, the one that requires the least amount of faith to accept the conclusion is the universe had a designer. So that leads us into William Paley's divine watchmaker argument. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's centuries old, but it still holds true. In fact, all the debates that were happening at the time, there were people saying, wait a minute, William Paley, if you give something enough time, anything can happen. And we've seen secular scientists come back and say, isn't it interesting after all of these years of research that William Paley's argument stands where it was, and the other side of it has really collapsed on itself because of so much design we see in the universe. So again, if you look at these pictures on the screen, if you're able to see them, if you're online, I don't think you can, I apologize, we're just looking at a watch. Who in the right mind looks at a watch on somebody's wrist or takes the face off and looks in the inside, the inner workings of a watch and says, sure, I could believe that came around by accident. Okay? We know by experience that watch had a watchmaker. It had a designer. It had a purpose for why it was built. Now, it doesn't mean it was perfect. People are imperfect and we make mistakes and all that, but we look at this and we just don't think that this is an accident. So if you were walking on some beach and found a watch, your first instinct wouldn't be to say, wow, look what the sand and the waves and the sun and all the energy that's on this island that I don't think anybody's ever stepped on before. Wow, look at this beautiful watch that was created. No, I think your first instinct would be, somebody was here before me and lost a watch, or left it here on purpose, or some other reason for the watch's existence. You would not think this looks like an accident. It looks like it's purposeless. Okay? And that was his argument, and it really has held true over the centuries, even though it was attempted to be refuted at its time. Again, meaning statistically, time equals infinity, they say anything can happen. But it doesn't look like it, does it? Okay, so here again, we're gonna recover some ground from last week of the anthropic principle. So again, anthropic meaning design for man. The principle that we see, this comes from secular scientists. Certainly Christians and others can adopt the same viewpoint, but it really was not something that Christians are trying to force onto secular worlds, secular thinking, secular scientists. It's themselves, those same groups, that have said, gosh, it sure seems interesting that the world was designed for man. Okay. So it seems the conclusion, they seem to say, really is inescapable, that the principle would declare. And you can certainly Google this and look at all of the information, and I'm sure you'll also find arguments for God and against God in the same research. But really, ignore the opinions, and again, focus on the information for yourself. What does the evidence lead me to conclude from what I see? Okay. That the world we live in, inescapable seems to be the conclusion, was designed and fine-tuned to support human life. So if you're looking through your book, about page 98 through 106 has the listing of what I'll cover here. And some of this is a repeat from last week, some of it's new. In this case, the authors give you a little bit more specificity as to what would happen or why it's so important for these design parameters to be just where they are. So the oxygen levels on our planet, if they were plus or minus 5% of their current ratio, would make life impossible. Okay, so you got a 5% gap with just the oxygen levels within our atmosphere. The atmospheric transparency, how much transparency? It allows a precise amount of needed solar radiation to enter the Earth's atmosphere. If you get a little more, we would all have cancer and we would all have radiation poisoning, we would die. You get a little less, there would be not enough energy coming from the sun to fuel all of the life that happens on the planet. Okay, so there's a transparency of our atmosphere. There's a moon-Earth gravitational interaction. Supports the precise levels of ocean tides, which therefore drives climate stability to support life. We need the climate. You may not like the snow, you may love summer, or vice versa, but we need an ongoing climate that has oscillations and changes within it in order for things to grow and reproduce and all of the aspects of life that we see. It's super important. And guess what? If we don't have the moon, life doesn't happen here. If you watch science shows on TV, like on Discovery Channel or whatever, they'll talk about, we have all these theories about how the moon came to be. It was, a outgassing of Earth, or a comet impacted Earth and broke off a piece of Earth, and all kinds of speculations. But without whatever the cause is, whatever the reason is, life would not happen on this planet if our moon was not composed the way it is. Meaning there's a gravitational relationship between the Earth and the moon, which means the moon and the Earth both have to have a certain size and ratio one to another, certain distance from one another, a certain orbit. The moon has to have a certain orbit around the Earth in order for all these interactions to be maintained. And it's critical to the oceans, and if I haven't already said so, oceanography, the ocean, or the ocean itself, is absolutely essential to all life. We could live 1,000 miles inland, but the oceans and the life that are teeming with life and recycling water and all the stuff that's happening there is absolutely essential to life. Carbon dioxide levels. We do need some. In fact, our plants that we breathe, the oxygen that's produced by plants, they need carbon dioxide, and it needs to be at a certain level. So it seems to be, science has agreed, it seems to be tuned for life, because without greenhouse gases destroying life, but also allowing photosynthesis to occur. So you've got this tension between greenhouse gases that kind of just kill and destroy everything, but you need enough of the carbon dioxide for the plants to be able to actually engage in photosynthesis. And I'm guessing most of us haven't, but I've looked at it a little bit, but I can't even remotely claim to understand it. If you've ever looked at the mathematics behind photosynthesis, it will fill this wall back here with all kinds of computational steps that are required for plants to convert carbon dioxide into oxygen through using sunlight to accomplish it. Scientists are still grappling with and wrestling with the mathematics behind photosynthesis. It's huge, and they barely understand it. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, we take it for granted that somehow plants, and from our perspective, it might be 6,000 years ago. From a secular scientist, it might be 14 billion years ago or 4.5 billion years ago. But somehow plants just magically came up with this formula, mathematical formula, to convert carbon dioxide back into oxygen so that carbon-based life forms can actually live. And the mathematics behind it are baffling the greatest scientific minds on the planet right now, because they're still trying to figure out exactly all the mathematical foundations that underpin that. Get a drink here. Gravity. Oh boy, scientists can't even figure out what gravity is. Is it a force? Is it just an interaction between time and space and things are shifting back and forth? Everybody's trying to figure out what gravity actually is. Doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is the force that it exhibits on our planet, in our solar system, in our whole universe, really, is so tuned to support our sun's very existence, and thus obviously allowing life on Earth. The factor is within, and you see the number on the screen, they say it's within that level of tolerance. If gravity was any different than that, any closer, you change that final 1 to a 2, life would be impossible. Okay? So how did gravity get to be so specific that it would allow for life to occur? That's the tolerance level. I think I've watched one show, I probably will get it wrong, but Watch one, because I watch these shows all the time too, both from a secular viewpoint. I watch the nature shows or the whatever science shows. And there was something that was talking about, we live in about a 93 billion light year universe from edge to edge, right? And it goes all around the place. But it's like trying to hit 1 inch across a 93 billion light year universe and get it right. It's basically about the same odds. Okay? You're flying a spaceship from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe, and I say, I'm going to tell you when to stop, and if you don't stop and within 1 inch of where I tell you, all life will cease in the universe. It's that close. Okay. Centrifugal force holds planet in orbit around the sun. We need this force. It has to be perfect. Otherwise, all the planets would just get gravitationally sucked into the sun, and therefore they would die. Or, on the opposite side, they wouldn't be in a gravitational relationship with the sun. They would float off into space and have no connection to the sun. And by the way, our planets, whether it's 8 or 9 with Pluto or whatever we have, they're essential for our survivability on this Earth, because if you look at Jupiter and Saturn and some of these planets out, these big gas giants out there, they're collecting all kinds of asteroids and comets that would obliterate, tiny little Earth if they weren't out there protecting us. In fact, the backside of the moon is doing the same thing. It's getting constantly bombarded with stuff, collecting stuff that would, we believe, be a life-extinguishing event on Earth should those things make it from the outer edge of the solar system into Earth's actual surface. Water vapor levels, regulated greenhouse effects, surface temperature levels. I think we talked about that to a different extent. Jupiter's orbit in relation to the Earth prevents space debris. I guess I just talked about that, causing too many impacts on the Earth. So that's critical. The crust thickness of the Earth. Okay, it regulates oxygen levels in volcanic tectonic activity. We actually need. I know some people die in earthquakes and volcanic activity, but we actually need that stuff. The Earth that we live in needs to be replenished and regenerated through these volcanistic processes that happen. And so if our crust of our Earth was too thick to allow volcanic activity, then life would cease. If it was obviously too thin and it was happening all the time, it would just be killing everything in its path all the time. So it's critical that it's at the Earth's crust thickness is critical where it belongs. The rotation period of the Earth regulates temperatures and wind velocities. We have a 24-hour rotation cycle. If it were longer, there would be too much freezing on the backside when we're away from the sun to support life. And if it were faster, it would probably generate incredibly destructive winds on the surface of the Earth. The axial tilt, we're at a 23-degree tilt in relationship to the sun. It regulates the surface temperatures again. It's critical for us to have this narrow window with which organic life can actually survive if we don't have that tilt. If it was 22 degrees, 24 degrees, they say life would not be possible on Earth. Lightning. We need lightning, and people die in lightning storms and all that kind of stuff too, right? But lightning regulates the soil nitrogen levels without causing too many fires or greater destruction. We need lightning. It does its job. More lightning, be highly destructive to us people trying to live on the planet. Less lightning, we would not have nitrogen in our soil. Guess what? If we don't have nitrogen in the soil, we're not eating much, or the animals that we eat aren't eating much, and so we're in deep trouble. Again, back to seismic activity, regulates the ocean floor nutrients. Again, oceans are essential for life without causing greater destruction on the planet. So even many atheists, conclusion of all of that, admit that the evidence of design as exposed by or related to the anthropic principle requires intelligence to have a fine-tuned universe to support life. Even those who atheists admit this seems far too complex, far too precise for it to be anything other than fine-tuned. And again, as we will continue to talk about all through this, you and I might suspect, well, that means they have appealed to God. They're no longer atheists. God is their answer to all of this fine-tuning. Generally speaking, no. And we've talked about it, I think, the last couple of weeks on end. Many scientists will say, no, not God, not the God who holds us accountable for our actions and all of that. We want to appeal to aliens. I'm going to appeal to some alien somewhere else. It's, if you like the technical term, it's called directed panspermia, where parts of life came to this planet and somehow got it all started. Others will appeal, as we talked about also, the multiverse, and there's actually some sections in here on the multiverse theory. In fact, actually, it's next. So one of the appeals to a non-God God, right, a non-judgmental God, a non-God who doesn't require people to actually behave in a certain way, they've invented this multiverse theory, which could never be proven. We can never possibly understand. Even if it were true, there's no one who could ever prove it. It's all just speculation. Okay? But they basically, multiverse really means, again, infinite, an infinite number of alternate universes. And do we just happen to live in the one universe that something created all these multiverses, that somehow accidentally, by randomness and chance and no guidance and no intelligence, somehow got us into a place where life could happen? And they're presuming that there's billions or trillions of universes that just couldn't quite get the mathematics right by accident, and therefore, they're out there, death zones, but this one somehow just happened to get it right. Okay. Of course, there's no evidence for this, never could be any evidence for this. How do you go out beyond our universe and test or discover a multiverse cause? This couldn't possibly be done. So it's obviously an appeal to ignorance, right? We don't know, so we're going to put our trust in that which we could never know. And then infinity and physical reality are not compatible. Okay, they're not. Things we never find. Actually, there's two things that we use mathematically all the time, and there's no evidence of them at all in the universe we live in. Doesn't mean God doesn't have some of these qualities, or at least one of them, but we don't see infinite anything. There's nothing in this universe that is infinite. Okay, you heard of Planck's length? You can only go down so far. You can keep slicing something down at the molecular level as far down as you can go. And eventually they say at Planck's length, it loses locality. It no longer exists in anything. You just can't get there. You can't keep chopping that string smaller and 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 smaller. Eventually, there's nothing left. It just stops. Okay, that's called the Planck length. The other thing is randomness. There actually is nothing. We have no capacity randomness. In fact, there's, have you ever heard of chaos theory? I suppose some of us may have first heard of it in the movie Jurassic Park, right? And that is what seems chaotic to the uninformed, unstudied, is actually always follows some type of pattern, and you can predict it once you understand the patterns. It's saying there's no such thing as randomness, even explosions. In fact, demolition teams use controlled explosions to accomplish an end result, even though the explosions seem to cause randomness. But you can control it, and therefore it's not random. So within our own finite universe, there simply is no such thing as infinity. There's not an infinite number of atoms in the universe. It's limited. There's not an infinite size of the universe. It's limited. There's not an infinite amount of time in the universe. It had a beginning, and we all know it has an end coming. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. Everybody knows the universe has a beginning and will have an end, unless you're just denying the easy and observable evidence that's out there. All right. So the multiverse obviously does not resolve the original problem that was created, as we discussed last week, in the cosmological argument. And somehow you want this uncaused first cause. And it doesn't resolve the precision within the universe that we see. We just looked at with the anthropic principle. So all it does, that I often refer to, it kicks the can down the road to so it becomes somebody else's problem. Scientists can't figure out how we have a fine-tuned universe. Scientists can't figure out how it all seems to come together, how it seems to scream, I have been designed with a purpose. And so they kick the can down the road and say, well, given enough time, given enough multiverses, given enough this and that, answers we will never come up with, but just trust us. There's something out there that created us that's not God. Okay, that's the ultimate of that. So the multiverse theory is really, according to the authors here, and I would certainly concur, is a desperate attempt to avoid the implications of design, namely that all designs require a designer. Just like every building requires an architect or a general contractor, and every automobile requires an automobile manufacturer, and every painting requires a painter, right? And all of these things, the universe requires a designer because it has been designed. And so, as they say here, their quote again is, the extreme evidence that we have. I've only given you a list of 20 or so. There's more than 100 of these anthropic principles, as I said, all line up somewhat on a razor's edge. Can't change more than 5%, can't change more than, a billionth of a percent, far less than a billionth of a percent. They say the extreme evidence that all scientists can observe and evaluate for their own sakes requires, therefore, extreme evidences to explain away the very evidence that they see. What's extreme evidence? Or what's extreme theories? Multiverses, aliens. They require these extreme excuses to get around what they know is true. The universe that we live in is designed. And so they're appealing to ignorance and therefore appealing to something that they could never test, never prove. They just want you and I to believe it. They want their own hearts to believe it, again, because they don't like the fact that God makes them accountable to him. So the more human knowledge we gain, the more it demands a designer, a creator, a sustainer of everything. But the willfully ignorant press on with theories that attempt to explain observable facts without God. So any questions on any of that? So that's kind of a quick run through of the anthropic principles. Or something you have a question about? Is that, again, I would encourage you online, if this interests you, just Google or whatever search engine you like, anthropic principle. Whenever you do any of your research on your own, again, I'm trying to help you. I am not trying to convince you of what I think. I'm trying to convince you to find facts and evidences for yourself. Always come up with a process and say, what is fact and what is opinion? Okay? So let's say you go out there and you Google anthropic principle and you come up with some article on it. Separate facts, observable, testable facts, from opinions about those facts. Okay? The fact is the gravitational relationship to the Earth is here. Okay? What somebody claims about how it got there is an opinion or a subjective viewpoint of it. What the evidence is that seems to be testable by scientific means is fact. So the Earth and Moon relationship, the gravitational constant, all of these things separate opinion and subjective insights from observable facts. Okay. Want to know more? Look to the heavens. Right? So here we're going to, again, just kind of filter in a little bit of Scripture. We haven't really started to prove the Bible yet in the book or in our study, but, want to know more? The heavens declare the glory of God. For ancient times all around, people can look up at the stars, they can look up and see. God says in the very first chapter of the book of Genesis, in the very first book of the Bible, he says he put the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky for times and seasons for people to be able to run their lives by. So people have been looking up to the stars and saying, I can count on that moon having a 28-day cycle. I can order my days and my weeks and my months or whatever around the moon and its lunar cycles, and I can see stars in the sky, and I can sailors from ancient times could navigate across waters in the blackness of night with no lights and no maps and Google Earth or anything like that, because they could look at the stars in the sky and trust them to lead them to the same place that they had mapped out last time. Okay? Look to the glory of heaven and the stars. They were there for us. God put them there for us to use and to learn from. And one of the things that they scream is that God is a designer. God is the creator. So, again, a few more scriptural references here. Who is my equal, God, says the Holy One, Lord God. Lift up your eyes to the heavens. Who's my equal? Who can create a universe like I've created? He asked the question. It's rhetorical because obviously no one can. But if you see design, it seems to imply you should be looking also for the designer behind the design. Also, by looking to the heavens or in the Word of God, humans can begin to understand the glory, the majesty, the power, and the size of our Creator, which is actually, we only begin to somewhat comprehend how immense and powerful He is. If He can create our teeny tiny little sun, which of course you can fit 1 million Earths inside our sun, but our sun is really small compared to most stars that are out there, or many stars that are out there. You look at it and go, this God must be incredibly powerful. Enough energy produced on the sun and every second to power everything on Earth, right? I mean, it's amazing. So, we can see God's Word declaring the very truth that we see with our own eyes and our own experience and our own testability of the universe that we live in. So, His invisible, glorious attributes declared by Scripture can clearly be seen by anyone willing to look up and acknowledge the God in heaven is the great designer of everything. We can perceive everything that we can possibly perceive in this universe. So, like Romans 1:20 says, we are without excuse. We either accept the truth or we suppress the truth, okay, about the universe that we live in. All right, any follow-up questions, comments on that? Again, the scriptures that they close up the chapter with are not there to prove the Bible has the right view yet. It's just there to remind us that there already is a declaration that if every design has a designer, God's the one who makes the claim. In fact, you won't really find any other religious text on the planet that will make the same kind of claims as the Bible does. That says, hey, I'm God, there's no one like me, I'm the creator of everything, look at my creation, and you'll understand that I exist. That you're not going to find that in the Quran, you're not going to find that in the Book of Mormon, you're going to find it only in the Word of God, where He declares, I'm God, and there is no one like me, and you can look at all that I've created, and you will understand me, or you can suppress my existence in your own mind, but you can't get out of it. Yeah, Bill.
It just seems in our post-industrial society that we have kind of lost the ability to look to the heavens and feel what it emanates.
Right. Well, I mean, light pollution is a real thing, so we cannot even begin to see the kind of stars that our ancestor could see before electricity, right? So we've lost that. So we live in most of America, most of civilization lives in big cities with big lights. They're on all the time, and you can see a few stars and you can see the moon. But no, we're not laying out there in our backyard or outside our tent window or whatever and looking at an incredible. If you camp and you've gone out to the darkest of darkness, you've seen more stars than most people who've never left a city could even imagine exists. And you can see them with your own naked eyes, right? So did I answer your question, or did I?
I just think that would be something good to teach them.
Yeah, right.
Because there's an evident view right there when they comprehend
Right.
the multi-layered stars and the depth.
Sure. Which is why, I mean, I think you can say there was a lack of desire to be held accountable to a God and a creator throughout most of our creation. You see it with Cain in the first murder that's recorded in the Bible, or first human-on-human murder, if you don't count Satan. But you see throughout most ancient cultures, while they didn't believe in the same God and the same Bible and the same theology that had been communicated, all cultures believed there must be a God. They saw everything around them. They looked at the stars. They look at the complexity of their own hand. They look at everything, and they never said, gosh, I bet an accident created all this. It's only in recent years that we've gone so far as to say we could possibly be here by the result of an accident. So I think, and the stars are one of God's primary ways of saying, just look up. Take a look. You'll see the glory. Okay, so that covered chapter 3. I think, is that chapter 3 or chapter? I think it's that's chapter 4. So I just wanted to show you. Yeah. That's right. Let's put it in here. So here's some pictures of the stars. I just threw in a few pictures here just for your own edification. If you're online, I don't think you can see them, but I can email you if you like. So here, here's obviously a galaxy. It's in spiral arms, and it doesn't look accidental. And it's in these spiral state, these spiral galaxies. It's organized. It's got intentionality behind it. It also tends to scream of a young universe, because if these spiral arms, they're spinning, and they are spinning, the center spins faster than the outer, and so eventually it would all get wound up and the spiral arms would disappear. Like, we live in a specific little part of the real estate of the Milky Way galaxy in between big spiral arms. If those arms collapsed on us, we would cease to exist on our planet. Life couldn't be happening. We live in this pocket that's perfect for life, our solar system, our planet. And so if it were more than, let's say, 1 million years, I mean, it doesn't have to be a really super long time. If these galaxies are more than 1 million years old, they would already stop spinning on a galaxy, a spiral galaxy like we see. And so there's just more evidence that we have that. So again, here's just some pictures. If you've heard of the James Webb Space Telescope, right? It's changing everybody's thinking about everything. And you've probably seen some headlines out there. The James Webb Space Telescope proved the Big Bang is not real, is a false theory, right? You might ask, why is this? Here's another one, even more beautiful from James Webb. You might ask, why are they saying that? Well, think about the theory, secular theory, okay? And that first one is that the speed of light's 186,000 miles a second, and they believe, even if the universe had a beginning 14 billion years ago or 13.8 billion years ago or whatever the number is, okay, that when we look through, like, let's say the James Webb when we look through regular telescopes or even the Hubble telescope, we're trying to see out what they call looking into the past. The light that came to the Earth is not light today. It's light that's been traveling for 14 billion years to get to the Earth. So it's like looking into the past. We would never be able to see, according to the theory, we'd never be able to see a galaxy 14 billion years away. So we assume that we're looking at old light that's taken a really long time to get here, and that's how we get to those ages, right? And so what did they do? They got the James Webb Space Telescope up there into deep space with incredibly powerful optics that can look way, way, way deeper into the outer parts of outer space, as farther than they ever could before. And what were they expecting to find? They were expecting to find, because we're looking backwards in time, they were expecting to find the very early stages of these galaxies forming. Like they must be young, because we're looking back through time. And we keep looking back as far as we can go, and they go, well, this isn't right. They look just as mature as our universe, or I mean not universe, our solar system, our galaxy, right? And they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. If light's traveling all this time, it took all this time for light to get here, and we look all that far back, and they're just as aged looking as our own Milky Way galaxy, then how is it 14 billion years old, right? Or maybe it's older. Maybe it's 400 billion years old, because we can't figure this out. Scientists is grappling with, why are we not seeing what we expected to see? And you've probably seen headline after I can't tell you, probably 20 or 30 headlines in the last 4 months with the James Webb Telescope, and they're saying, this seems to disprove everything we thought before. So, another picture here, James Webb Telescope, more fun stuff. Okay. All right, so that's chapter 4, divine design, and how it seems to indicate we need a designer. Okay. All right, have you read chapter 5? You don't have to have read it, but chapter 5 is talking about the first life and the importance of first life. So the chapter opens with this statement, take out the garbage, Mom. Meaning not mom should take out the garbage. Mom has written a note to a child and says, take out the garbage from your mom. And if you read the chapter, remember I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl, I think it was a boy. It's like, maybe this message isn't really from my mom. It's just an accident that happened, and I don't have to obey it. Okay? Does that sentence, I didn't count the number of words, 4, 7, 10, 24, 10, 15 or 16 or something. That sentence of 16 characters, how probable is it that it appeared just by accident? It's a simple message. Anything can happen. I mean, The dog could have come in and typed it out on the typewriter by accident and left it on the counter for the kid, right? I mean, it seems possible, right? These 16 letters or whatever. Okay. Is it possible? Well, the mom doesn't think so. When is the mom going to accept that as an excuse? I told you to take out the garbage. I left you a note. And the son says, oh, I thought that note was an accident. I really could never conceive that you actually wrote the note. Mom's going to say, no, I told you to take out the garbage, right? Because these things don't happen by accident. Well, that little teeny message carries information, but it doesn't even come close to carrying the amount of information that's required to build any form of life. What they call, we got to get rid of the term simple cells, by the way. There's no such thing as a simple cell. But a single cell, whether it's not a multicellular organism, a single cell is more complex than anything we could possibly ever have seen in our entire life. Just the DNA inside the cell is more complicated. But the cell itself, the operational functions of the cell are far more sophisticated and more organized than New York City. And it has many of the same processes. Okay? It needs a way of bringing energy into the cell. It needs a way of processing the energy. It needs a way of taking components from one end of the cell and addressing them and sending them to a different part of the cell at the right address at the right time, and it needs a transportation system to bring parts from one part of the cell to the other part of the cell to the right address. Okay? And when the energy, and not all energy can be consumed, so it has waste product. Every cell has a waste product. It needs a waste management system within the cell to get rid of the waste. And it needs to go through that cellular membrane. That cellular membrane can only let in the things it wants to let in, and it only wants to let out stuff, its waste product it no longer needs. And I'm just getting started with the complexity of the simple cell, right? So let's start talking about some of the first life implications here. Okay. So some have referred to this, or the authors refer to it at least, as the supreme problem for Darwinists. And we say Darwinists, there's multiple different terms we can use. We mean people who believe in Darwinian evolution. You can also refer to them as materialists, and that doesn't mean they're all fancy watches and cars. It means they believe that materials, that matter in the universe, is all that you need to explain everything in the universe. You don't need anything else other than matter. So we call them materialists. Or secular humanists. It's all kind of in the same kind of category. It's a belief system. It's really a religion based on explaining God out of it. And so it requires, as the book indicates, more faith to believe in that than it does to believe in the divine explanation. Okay. So here's some questions, right? Supreme Parliament. Where did the source materials for life come from? How did they survive in a harsh Earth atmosphere? Again, we mentioned this, I think, last week, but you'll notice that in any cartoon or documentary with graphics or in a book or any place else, they always talk about this primordial goo, right, of some sort or another, and it has no resemblance to the earth we live on. The reason why it has no resemblance to the earth we live on is because you can't get life to form, or the building blocks of life, these molecules, to start wanting to join one to another if our earth is filled with oxygen and all kinds of other things. It doesn't work that way. So it always has this primordial goo that somehow, it's protected from the oxygen, and somehow things are just have the right properties to get started, and it will include some type of a lightning strike into the pond of goo to create an energy source to somehow spark things to life. And that's what, of course, Miller and Urey tried to do, right, with their test tube experiments that everybody probably heard prove that they created life in a test tube in the 1950s or whatever. Not even remotely close. They proved that they could take a couple of building blocks that you don't normally find put together and get a couple of them together. But, of course, they cheated because they created all the conditions they wanted. They added all the outside energy, and then they circulated it through their test tubes and extracted, before it could be destroyed again, what they wanted. Okay? That's all it proved is it requires intelligence to get the first building blocks of life to form on this planet. Right? They didn't create life by accident in a test tube. So where did it all come from? And again, you have all these questions about life because the answers are not obvious if you haven't studied it. So again, where did materials come from? How did these materials, once they got here, how did they survive a harsh atmosphere? Did water exist? If so, in what form, and how did it impact these molecules trying to form? Because if water's there, water is the universal solvent. It dilutes everything. And so these chemicals that don't really want to attach to each other together anyway, you add water to the mix, and they immediately want to unbond with each other, which is the exact opposite of what chemists and biologists need to happen to get life to form. Again, did oxygen exist? It's needed for life. Once that life sparks into existence, it needs oxygen in one form or another. But of course, oxygen before it sparks into life will kill it, because oxygen is destructive to those chemical bonds. How did long chains of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins or the building blocks of DNA, how did long chains of amino acids form in just the right sequence to become the building blocks for the first life? This is no trivial issue. We're talking about chains of hundreds of long amino acids, all in the right order, all in the right elements, right? The right amino acids in the right order, all sequenced together into chains, hundreds or even sometimes thousands of amino acids long. How did they all just form just right to get into that particular sequence? And of course, I know I mentioned this last week. Which came first, of course? The DNA that produces proteins, or the proteins which make up DNA? DNA is evident in every life form on the planet. Single-celled amoebas, human beings, trees. Okay, it's all there. The instruction book for creating the body plans and the systems within any living thing comes from the DNA. So, did protein originate first and then build DNA? Well, that's strange, because now that life is here, the only known source for building proteins is DNA. So did DNA come first and start building proteins? But wait a minute, DNA is made of protein. I can't seem to get there. It's a chicken and the egg variety, which of course chicken and egg conundrums only exist without God. Okay, which came first, the chicken or the egg? He told us in Genesis chapter 1. He created the animals, and they were to reproduce after their kind. You don't have that problem if you trust the Bible. And you don't have a DNA and protein problem if you trust that God created. You do if you're waiting for undirected, unguided, unintelligent processes to build them together in a way that can't possibly be done. We can't even do it today. Take all of the technology, all of the greatest scientific minds, take all that we have available to us, all the wealth that we can throw at it. We can't do this today. And somehow we're expecting it happened in a pond scum 4.5 billion years ago to get started with things. It just doesn't seem to add up. So even if somehow I gave you right here at this moment and said, I'll give it to you. DNA came first. Don't know how, don't know why, DNA came first. There was DNA, and then DNA started building proteins. That would not explain where the information that's contained in the DNA came from, because information always comes from a mind. So just because some things sequence together in the right way, even if I give it to you, it doesn't give you information that's required for the cell to continue to build and reproduce and survive in life. So where did the information programming come from? You ask any computer programmer, any computer scientist, and say, do computer programs build themselves? Do they modify themselves without somebody telling it how to modify it, right? Do they just, they take a program like Microsoft Windows or something, and they just go, I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of garbage into my computer screen and type a whole bunch of garbage in, and then tell the computer just to randomly sort all that garbage, and I'm going to expect the greatest operating system to come out at the other end. Is that what we do? Or does information require intelligence to order it and to produce it? Okay. So can random chemical processes produce complex genetic codes necessary for the systems to live and reproduce? Do they? I don't think so. Okay? In fact, I know not. They can't possibly do so. These genetic codes are, so if you don't know, I bet you've probably heard of the Human Genome Project. Okay? Human Genome Project, I think, was centered somewhere around the year 2000. Okay? And they spent, I'm sure, I don't know the total, tried to look it up, I could never really find a great answer for it, but they had over 100 like PhD scientists employed for about 20 years at somewhere, I think it was in the neighborhood of 20 different research organizations, all working together to map out the human genome. My numbers might be a little off, but I mean, it's a big thing. It's a big effort. Very expensive, huge number of scientific minds all coming together trying to map out the human genome. And they did it. Well, they say they did it. Okay? Actually, if you studied it, they only mapped 7% of it because they'd already predetermined that human DNA is 97% junk, or 93% junk, left over from our evolutionary history that's implied. And so they only mapped 7% of the human genome, and it took them like 20 years and hundreds of scientists to try and map this stuff out. Okay? That's how complex the DNA molecule actually is, and all the information contained therein. It's amazing, and we still don't even barely begin to grasp it. Right? You see all these detective shows, and they get DNA results within an hour to tell you that this person is DNA matched to the crime. Well, we're talking about months of shortcut where they send it off to a certified DNA lab, and they have to sequence all this stuff, and it takes them months to figure out, does this DNA match this DNA? Right? It's amazingly complex, and I'm going to show you some more of that as we go. All right, why don't we take our bottom of the hour break, and we'll come back and keep running through this stuff. Yeah. let's come back in. Got plenty to go here. All right, so back on our subject, and this you will find this in the textbook or the book if you bought it and are reading it. They talk about amoeba, and again, I always put it like in quotations, the simple cell of a living organism. Talk about this is well known in all circles, but both atheistic, materialistic, and Christian, and whatever other denomination or belief system there might be out there. A simple cell. We all probably picked up some water from the pond and put it under a microscope when we were in school or something like that, and looked at these little things swimming around and go, wow, okay. The simple little cell is, and you can only look a little bit into the complexity of it with a ocular microscope, or a 10x or a 50x or whatever microscope. But it contains, that simple cell in its own DNA contains more than 1,000 encyclopedias worth of information, assuming you probably got a 300-page in volume, so you got a huge amount of information. 1,000 encyclopedias of say 300 pages each with specific information. It's not simply random letters in this DNA code. It's actually super, super specific. So in other words, that book of the amoeba, or encyclopedia of 1,000-volume set of encyclopedias, has to be cover to cover precisely right, or the amoeba dies, or would never have come to life in the first place. Every single character, no typos, perfect order, perfect sequencing. Everything has to be absolutely right for that simple life form to exist. Okay? That's a lot of information. That's a lot of precision that's required for life to come into existence or to continue to exist. So even simple messages like take out the trash, right? All around us result in a conclusion that intelligent source authored that phrase, then we rightly conclude that much more complex message coded into every DNA molecule in every living thing must have come from an intelligent source. In fact, the source would be supremely intelligent, since we have been studying the DNA molecule for decades and have only partially discovered the total information that it contains, right? I mentioned that, right? So when they did the Human Genome Project, they mapped about 7% of it, left off about 93% of it. And what they've been finding ever since is, we shouldn't have left those parts out. That's actually not junk. And they go find more, no, that actually had a purpose. We thought it was, residual, dormant, no longer needed. And they keep finding more and more and more and more information in our own DNA that is so super important to the functions of the body and the living system that we have. So that ought to immediately leave you suspect when they say that a chimpanzee and a human DNA are 99.1% similar or whatever. Not even close. They don't even understand. They've only looked at 7% of human DNA, or maybe 9% by now or something. They only looked at about 9%, and they're making this big, broad claim humans and chimpanzees have the same DNA sequence with just a small, teeny little variation. Well, I don't mind telling you how they came to that conclusion. First off, it's by their own presuppositions supported by their own facts, or their invented facts. But what they did, when they did all this, I've seen a geneticist and a biologist give the description of all of this, right? What they did is there's no way they're going to spend billions of dollars and hire hundreds of scientists to map a chimpanzee DNA, right? No way. So they did it once with humans, and they did about 7% of it. And then they looked through the human, or they actually took a chimp DNA, and they just looked for patterns, kind of, maybe visual or whatever, something they could understand mathematically, patterns. And they took a little chunk of chimpanzee DNA, and then they went and compared it to human DNA and said, oh, wow, look at that. We found something that looks very similar in humans to something in chimpanzees. And then they claim that because this is 99% similar, this one little fraction of a percent of DNA is so similar, well, humans and chimps are 99% similar. They ignored everything else. They came to the conclusion they wanted to come to. Not even close. And would you expect that an air-breathing, earth-dwelling mammal has some similarities in their DNA structure? Does it make sense that God or the Creator would use similar solutions to similar problems in similar functioning systems? Like breathing? Well, if we're all breathing air, maybe we have very similar DNA to help us breathe air and develop our lungs. Okay, so a little extra information for you there. So science, with all of its intellectual technology resources available, has never produced even the source material necessary for life. Now we can play with what God has given us. We can make modifications to DNA and all kinds of other things, but we can't create our own, right? We can take apples and make hybrids, or make a pear and an apple, or whatever, or a pluot, or plum and a apricot, or whatever. We can change what God has given us to play with. We can't create our own stuff. So with everything we have, we've never produced any of the source material that would be necessary for life. Certainly science has never demonstrated the mechanisms for producing life from non-living materials, despite decades of trying to accomplish that very thing. We haven't even scratched the surface of trying to build these things from its component parts. Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. Right. If you're not familiar, or those online didn't hear that, talk about 1 Corinthians 3, where the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men. I mean, God is so much wiser, even in what we would deem foolish, if you will, like choosing fishermen to be the ones who carry his message for salvation rather than highly educated and influential scholars, right? The foolishness of God is far superior than all of the collective wisdom of men. So, yeah, you're right. It does scream that kind of interpretation. Okay. So we can't even come close. We've been doing genetics and biological studies of things for decades or even longer, and we haven't even come close to being able to mimic it. So with all of our technology and all of our money and all of our wisdom, we're nothing close to creating life out of nothing or out of raw materials. Why do we think that it happened by chance or accident? Doesn't seem to make sense. And again, going with the theme of the book, which requires more faith? God, an intelligent and all-powerful being, created, or it all sparked into life, even though we can't seem to spark it into life ourselves? So again, here we go. If all the collective intelligence of humanity has failed to produce life or its essential components, how rational is it to believe that unintelligent, unguided forces produced any aspect of any living system, as an atheist is required to postulate? It all happened without intelligence, all happened without design or purpose. Okay, so then around page 120, they go into this just so theory. Now, you probably heard this, like this concept of God of the gaps. Oh, you Christians, you just fill in everything you're ignorant on with, oh, God did it, right? Well, how did the DNA come into existence? Well, God did that. And, oh, God did that. As if it's not a valid explanation. But the atheistic, materialistic, secular, humanistic views have the very same appeals to ignorance, the very same just so kind of explanations for everything. So there's simply, if you look at it objectively, there's no evidence to support the evolutionary theory, despite every claim that you've ever heard for most of our lives since Darwin. All of us are younger than Darwin by a long shot. So there's no evidence, right? And in fact, Darwin himself in his own Origin of Species book said, the fact there's no evidence should be the very reason why my theory is refuted. But he hopes that people will believe it anyway. And boy, did they latch on to that theory, right? So there's no evidence. And that's in terms of transitional forms, right? You might recall Darwin had postulated that the geological record with its fossils should be replete with far more transitional forms than completed whole healthy body plans, because you need to get from a reptile to a bird, or a fish to a reptile, or whatever, an amphibian, or whatever it is, and it should, all these almost got there. Oh, the snake grew some feathers, and it couldn't survive because feathers helped it in no particular way. but somehow it kept advancing, and we kept seeing the fossil record should be complete with all kinds of transitional forms. What we see is the exact opposite. From the very lowest layers, from the very beginning, we see fully complete, fully functional, non-transitional body plans in every aspect of the geological and fossil record that we see. There's no empirical observation. We can't go into a lab and start reproducing this stuff. Again, despite any of these claims that have been made, like we sparked life into existence, it's not even remotely close to reality. And no forensics, meaning the looking backwards in time, no forensics applied to reach a conclusion. These are just absolutely just so theories. They want us to believe, they want the world to believe, I don't know where I put my water, but they want us to believe, well, we say so, so please believe us. We want it to be true, so how about just believe us that it's true? That's a very different approach than saying, I believe Scripture, and God tells me that in the beginning there was nothing, and then he created the heavens and the earth. So, Bill, would you get me the water from that booth back there? Sorry. So, they can only invent a story. There's only the story that is invented that's consistent with their own biases, right? Imagine that. You have a story you want to tell, and you tell the story that's consistent with what you wanted it to say in the first place. And they want to convince us, thank you so much, that it's somehow true. But it's undeniable because life actually exists. We know life exists. We don't have to be an Immanuel Kant and say, there's no living things in this room. I mean, I see things. My mind wants me to think they're real and living, but, there's nothing real in this room. That's a whole different story, right? We see it, we see life, and we say, how did life get here? The most rational, reasonable explanation is something, someone, or God decided, I'd like to fill this planet with life, and had the power and intelligence and ability to accomplish that. Or we can appeal to chances and accidents and long periods of time and all kinds of other issues. We really would refer to it, I think, accurately as secular pseudoscience, because it's characterized by too much speculation, chasing after too few supporting facts. It's not. There's not facts to support evolution. There's not facts to support a Big Bang. There's not facts to support any of their attempts to explain life. Yeah. Okay, another fraud in that one.
I think 250 or 300 people earned the PhD bridging the evolutionary gap for Cro-Magnon. Only to find out decades later that the tooth they were looking at was actually from a pig.
Right, and intentionally filed down and acid etched to make it look like it's something that it wasn't. So, with every single one of these, Nebraska man, Neanderthal man, Peking man, Piltdown man, every single one of them has been proven to be either a misinterpretation of the bones themselves, but in most cases, outright deliberate fraud, right? Trying to create this perception that we found the missing link, we found some transitional form, and therefore all the scientists should bow down to the Darwinian proposals and reject God. And then they very quietly come back around and say, oh, Nebraska man? Sorry, that was fake. We'll just keep going. Many, 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 many fakes in all of that. So most of the ones you've ever heard of, if you look at it objectively and study it now, you'll find, oh yeah, it's already been admitted that the person who perpetrated the fraud admitted that they did something like file the tooth and etch it. So when top evolutionists have to resort to aliens to explain how life on our Earth came to be, you start to begin to understand just how complex life must actually be, or it was, if they're going to appeal to aliens, and they've abandoned Darwinian processes to get to life on this Earth. It screams, this is incredibly complex. It can't possibly happen by accident. And I think I mentioned either last week or the week before, like Sir Fred Hoyle said, it's like the probability of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a 747. It's just not possible. And so let's go to aliens, or let's go to multiverses. That'll get us there. Because no one wants to, no one can challenge us that aliens don't exist, and no one can challenge us that a multiverse generator somewhere outside of our universe doesn't exist. They'll never be able to prove it doesn't, so why not say it does? Darwinists are clearly acting on blind faith with their spontaneous generation theories on the origin of life. Look, didn't Louis Pasteur prove that spontaneous generation was impossible like 200 years ago, right? Oh, fruit flies. They show up when you have bad fruit, and maggots show up when you had bad meat or whatever. Louis Pasteur? And so, wait a minute, if I seal off the environment, I can let that thing rot forever, and it never gets new life in it because I've sealed it off from the outside. You know, the reality is fruit flies show up because we can't see them, but they find the fruit, and then they multiply, and then suddenly we can see them, right? Spontaneous generation of life from non-life was disproven 200 years ago, and yet it's still appealed to by the mainstream secular scientists every single day. So the belief that life on Earth spontaneously arose from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith, blind faith, really, in the strict, what they call reductionism, meaning you can reduce everything down to a simple principle like chance and time and matter and energy all somehow coming to exist. So this is his quote. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. Herbert Yaki quoted this. The belief that life on Earth arose spontaneously from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith in strict reductionism and is based entirely on ideology. He's a physicist and information scientist, okay, and not a Christian as far as I'm aware. Conversely, creationists and intelligent design proponents are simply making rational inference from the evidence which leads to an intelligent cause for the intelligent effect of having life on Earth. That's rational. That's reasonable. Okay? We propose all intelligence requires an intelligent source. Therefore, we see intelligent beings on Earth. It must have come from an intelligence from outside of us, right? So all this information, these thousands of encyclopedias worth of information in a single amoeba's DNA, that information had to come from somewhere. It had to come from an intelligent source. Why not claim that intelligent source is who he says he is? Now, we haven't put, like in the book, the flow of the book, if we're going to appeal to a intelligence and a creator and a designer and all of these kind of nebulous terms, we've gotten nowhere close to the God of the Bible and nowhere close to Christianity. We're just simply evaluating, can science give us a rational, reasonable explanation for existence of anything, including intelligence, or is the best, most rational conclusion it came from an intelligent source? Okay, we don't know who, where, what, whatever. It's what seems to be the most one. Now, again, you can say, well, scientists say the intelligent source was aliens. But they're really just, alien God is just a substitution of the same thing. They're saying that this alien had the power and intelligence and ability to create the incredibly complex life on Earth. Well, from our perspective, they would be God. I mean, we can't do it. We've been spending decades with billions of dollars of money and technology. We can't do it. Those aliens must be really smart. Those aliens must be really powerful. Way more powerful. Way more intelligent than we are. How is that not God? Right? I mean, we're hoping, we're calling them an alien because we don't really want to be accountable to them when we stand before this being, when we finish our days on Earth. But it's got to be God, because the aliens would have to be, many orders of magnitude more powerful, more intelligent, more purposeful than we are to create this, what we see on this planet. So materialism, or good science versus bad science. Materialism, even without any rational evidence, must be protected by atheists as the only mechanism for explaining the existence of anything, for they cannot allow a divine foot in the door of explaining life. Okay? That's their own statements, that's their own quotes. They will not allow a divine foot in the door. He's always excluded, so we always look for some other explanation other than God. And that is both philosophical for them and very, very, very pragmatic. If you are a scientist and you are funded by grants and other types of funding resources at universities or research centers or whatever it may be, if you proudly proclaim, I believe in God, and he's the reason for these explanations, all of your funding sources will dry up and you will no longer be a scientist working in that field. That's almost guaranteed. Okay? They will cut you off. They will chastise you. They will rebuke you. You won't publish papers in in your peer-reviewed journals and all of that. They will cut it off. And most scientists, if you ask them, they'll tell you, yeah, I could never come out and say that I was a Christian. Now we have some Christian scientific, I don't want to say Christian scientists, I want to, creationists or Christians who engage in scientific disciplines. We have many PhD Christians and working in all kinds of scientific fields, but they typically won't survive in a secular university or a secular scientific research facility. They'll get cut off and have no ability to provide a living for themselves. So they keep going and perpetuating the same lies, even though many of them know it can't possibly be true. So Darwinian materialism is a false religious philosophy. It's disguised as science. If you get nothing else out of these early chapters of the book of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, get that. It's a religious philosophy that is disguised as actual science. Again, find a way to separate objective facts from subjective statements about the facts. And then they give time and chance a chance. And kind of their funny little quote here. Again, saying, oh gosh, if anything is possible. And you've heard the monkey and the typewriter, right? And that's the other half of the William Paley watchmaker argument. If you put 100 monkeys in a room filled with unlimited typewriters and unlimited paper, they will sit there and type out eventually, over eons of time, all the works of Shakespeare and the Bible and all, scientific journals. They'll just keep typing away, accidentally typing out everything. Okay? Not true in multiple ways. Because, first off, you need some kind of arbitrator to say, you typed something good. I need to select that away so that it can preserve what's good and still reject the bad. You need something to kind of make a decision as to what's good and what's bad. But unfortunately, it's even worse for them because what we're talking about is not just benign ink going onto paper. They're trying to build life. And so when they get it wrong, it's not just, it would kill the monkey. Okay? It goes backwards. It's a destructive process. And so the whole monkeys and typewriters argument is just not even a viable explanation. So adding more time does not produce actual results. It doesn't. In fact, it generally goes in the opposite direction. It makes spontaneous generation more challenging. Spontaneous generation, life from non-life, abiogenesis, whatever term you want to put on there, okay? Because of the second law of thermodynamics. If you remember, we talked about the second law of thermodynamics, that everything tends towards disorder. It's like the universe started ordered and complete and what we might call fully wound up, and everything since then is a reduction in order, moving towards complete chaos, not the other way around. Biology is the only field of science that tries to ignore the second law of thermodynamics because they need it to go the opposite direction. They need to go from chaos to order, but the second law of thermodynamics says, no, everything goes from order to disorder. Okay? So it increases it over long periods of time. Long periods of time are not helpful to the equation. They work really well on your math class. They work really well on a whiteboard. T equals infinity, and suddenly everything's possible. But as we've already talked about, there is no such thing as infinity. In our universe, there is no such thing as infinity. And because life needs to build these compound blocks of life to keep building and building and building, time is actually destructive. Let's just assume you got a little ways. Well, the second law of thermodynamics will make sure that getting a little ways actually takes you right back to where you started. So the chance of correctly selecting, okay, this is where, so it's the probability of Darwinists want others to accept as scientific fact are astronomically or ridiculously small. So here's another analogy for you from science. Okay? the chance of selecting a single grain of sand in the Sahara Desert by randomness, okay, and then doing that same, selecting a single grain of sand in the Sahara Desert 3 times in a row, and that's the mathematical odds that have been calculated by Darwinists, not Christians, but secular scientists, to achieve spontaneous generation of a single protein molecule. That's not life. That's not even DNA. That's a single protein molecule. Then you need to get another 200 protein molecules to combine in a very specific order to approach the complex first life form coming from a source of non-intelligence. These numbers are so big, we can't comprehend it. How many grains of sand do you suppose are in the Sahara Desert? Billions upon billions upon billions, I'm sure, right? The odds of you going out there and finding one specific grain of sand, all the others are a death sentence. But you find one specific grain of sand, then we mix it all up again, and you find one specific grain of sand, it's 2 times in a row, and you mix it all up again, and you find that one specific grain of sand a 3rd time. That's effectively what it takes to get the first process started. Now you need to do 200 more of those in a row, never making a mistake, to get to the level of complexity in the first life form. It's impossible, right? I mean, any rational thinking human being would say that's impossible. Picking one grain of sand out of the Sahara Desert that's been specially identified, yeah, come on, that's absolutely impossible. It would never happen. You could have every single person on the planet for the last 6,000 years going and trying to pull that grain of sand in, and it's just simply not possible. But wait a minute. What if just by absolute happenstance they picked the right grain of sand? Great. Now do it three times in a row. Now do it 200 times more. Not possible. And again, this isn't some Christian saying, "Oh, you secular scientists, you're so bullheaded, you won't." This is secular scientists saying it about themselves, their own chances of life coming into existence by chance. So, chance is not a legitimate cause of anything. It's simply a word to describe mathematical probabilities. But there's never a guarantee. If there was a guarantee that you could at least expect at one point in time you go to the slot machines are programmed for some type of repetitive winning, but you're going to blindly go out to the blackjack table, and you're not going to take any. You're going to take the 2 cards that were delivered to you, and you're going to take the mathematical probability that I'm going to put all of my life fortune on those 2 cards and hope I beat the house. Right? What's the odds of that happening? That's way better odds, I'm sure, than anything we're talking about here. It's just a word to describe probabilities. Maybe I should use a better example. Like flipping a coin. You can do the mathematical probabilities of flipping a coin and saying, I want to see what the mathematical probabilities are flipping a coin 100 times in a row and always getting heads. And it's, completely random. You know that the coin flipping mechanism and the coin itself are perfectly weighted so that heads or tails would come up equally, 50-50 every single time. You say, no, I want to get 100 in a row. You can say it's mathematically possible, right? Do you really think if you spent 1 billion years flipping a coin that could easily come up 50-50 heads or tails every time it's flipped, you would ever get to 100 in a row? It seems to me, while it's mathematically possible, it's simply impossible. Because the coin never knows what it flipped the last time, or the second to last time, or the third to last time. It just keeps coming up heads or tails every other time. It's supposed to be possible. Maybe you get 4, 5, 6 in a row. You're not going to get 100 in a row. I pretty much bank my reputation. You'll never get 100 coin flips in a row that are all the same. If it's set up to get it to, you can flip and get this a 50-50 chance every single time. So it's really, the word chance is to cover ignorance. We don't know all the factors involved, so we're just going to throw our little magic wand at it and say time and chance solves our dilemma. That's all it's going to take. So if atheists don't know or refuse to admit all the factors and conditions that cause the first life to come into existence, really they should just admit it instead of using the word, well, it's possible by chance, to cover their ignorance. They should just say, we don't know. We need to get 200 amino acids all to line up in a specific order. We see that they are lined up in a specific order for the definition of life, and we don't know how it got there. Maybe someday we'll discover it, but to just say, well, anything's possible if you give it enough time and chances, that's not possible. Right? There's not enough atoms in the universe to account for these probabilities. Some of them, the number of atoms in the universe has been estimated to be 10 to the 80th, meaning a 10 with 80 zeros after it. That quote from Sir Fred Hoyle I told you about with the 747 going through the junkyard, he calculated the probability of life, and he only got a small portion of it, 10 to the 40,000th power. That's way more atoms than there are in the universe. Way, 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 way more atoms than there are in the universe. That's where he stopped and said the aliens must have done it because it couldn't have happened by chance. So rather than admit ignorance, intelligence cause, they make their chance probabilities their God. That becomes the God for them, chance and probability, to which they place their faith. It's not based in science. It's not based in reality. It's simply not possible to get that level of chances to come out to anything like life. So science, it says, is a slave to philosophy. Right? And as I said that, they're slave because they cannot escape this philosophical system. And generally speaking, they will lose their jobs and their funding if they even attempt to do so. So secular naturalism is a starting belief system that results in scientists ignoring empirically detectable scientific evidence for divine design. Again, they can't get a divine foot in the door. So he's never the cause. It's always something else, something far less likely, or even truly impossible. Again, that number, 10 to the 80th atoms in the universe, and 10 to the 40,000th power for even starting the building blocks of life from Fred Hoyle. Scientists and mathematicians have determined that anything 10 to the 50th power or worse, 50 zeros after it, is considered a miracle, because it's so statistically unlikely that it really is not possible it would ever happen. And Sir Fred Hoyle, like I said, calculated 10 to the 40,000th power just to get a piece of life started, not the whole thing. So objective science is a source of truth, but it's not the only source of truth. I think we can find other sources of truth beyond what you can measure or test on a blackboard or in a laboratory or with a calculator. So objective science results in verifiable truths. Bad science advances bad philosophies, right? If you're doing bad science and you make a philosophical claim based on bad science, you're going to have a bad philosophy. Science cannot be done without philosophy. It's required as part of the process. So science requires the use of philosophical systems like logic and reasoning to discover truth, right? We've been looking at how do you do things, right? Whatever it was, Spencer is a man, or all men are mortal. Spencer is a man, therefore Spencer is mortal, right? This logical, you can't get to conclusions. You can't make scientific claims without having logic. And as we've said, that requires something beyond the material world. We need a mind to come up with that. So it can't be done without philosophy. Science requires these philosophical systems for these reasoning and truth discoveries. Philosophical assumptions always dramatically impact the conclusions. If you start out saying, I believe in Darwinian evolution, and I'm committed to that, you will never find a non-Darwinian evolution explanation. And of course, we need to come to this conclusion that science doesn't really say anything. Scientists make claims. People make claims. People are faulty. People make mistakes. People intentionally deceive other people because it gains them something that they want. Science doesn't claim anything. Scientists do. We need to remember, they're not gods and they're not priests. They're just people, and we have to weigh what they say with every level of skepticism we would view anything else with. Like you would view skepticism of a realtor who says, I can sell your house for 2 times what the market value is. Okay? I view your claim with skepticism, right? And the same kind of thing with science. Claiming that life can come from non-life requires a great deal more of an explanation than just because I said so. So materialism, though, makes reasoning impossible. Materialism, that only explanations for anything comes from from materialism in the universe, right? Matter. So specified complexity, messages again that carry meaning, like take out the trash, or like our DNA, cannot be explained by their material components. You can't take all those letters that make up the phrase, take out the trash, and explain anything by just looking at the individual letters. You need to actually read the phrase in context to understand what the intended meaning was. The letters themselves don't carry any specific meaning. You jumble them all up and you get something different, it's probably garbage or gobbledygook, right? It's not going to carry a message until intelligence comes along and puts every letter where it's supposed to be, or most of them, so you can actually read the intended content. Typos and things like that, our brain can usually figure out what it's supposed to mean. But just throwing a bunch of Scrabble tiles on the floor and saying, surely there's something important in that message that I just threw on the floor is absurd. Human thoughts and theories are not comprised of materials. We have thoughts and we have theories, and none of them are in a material state. Okay? So if life, the point of this is that if life is the result of material components, scientists could easily make new life by just putting the raw materials together. They could. They could just take a bunch of proteins, throw them into a blender, and wait for some new life form to pop out. Is that what they do? Has anybody ever done that? No, because it requires information, it requires intelligence. Okay? The specific order of things matters for life to exist. And spiritual experiences could not and should not be dismissed as a merely psychological phenomenon. Secular scientists, Darwinian evolutionists, whatever you're going to say, oh, you faith people, you just believe anything. You can't explain thousands of years of people having faith in a God who created them as just being a psychological phenomenon. Okay? There's more to it. And there's more to everything we do, including our own conclusions and thoughts and propositions that we make. So if materialism were true, reasoning would be impossible. Because we reason in our minds and we come to conclusions, good or bad, based on what's in our mind, not based on materialism. Therefore, materialism itself cannot be the true explanation for life. Reasoning requires faith in what is not yet known or provable. We have to have, reasoning. I'm going to reason something, okay? And I'm going to reason, and it requires faith in what is not yet known or provable. Like, it's still dark outside, and the ground may still be covered in snow. I can't see outside right now, but I can postulate, I can speculate that because of the hour and because of the weather, it's probably still dark outside and there's still snow on the ground tonight. And now I can go, how do I do it? I can go prove it is by walking outside and testing my hypothesis. Okay. So two possible sources for reasoning. Pre-existing intelligence that gave us the capacity to engage in logical thought and reasoning. Or the other option is mindless chemicals, which offer no capacity for reasoning, which seems more of a better explanation for the reason why we as human beings are using the gray matter in our skulls to think about things. Is it because someone gave us the capacity to think about things, or because chemicals just decided that thought is something that could be added to the human existence? What's more rational? Our thoughts came from one who decided for us to think. So Darwinianists have the wrong box top of life, the wrong worldview. If all the pieces, right, we're back to the box top analogy. So if all the pieces of the worldview that we can actually verify, test, rationally think about, by truth and logic and reasoning, don't fit with this materialistic Darwinian worldview, then we should just be able to make a conclusion we have the wrong worldview, or Darwinianism is the wrong worldview. Materialism is the wrong worldview. selecting the right box of life is really not a matter of preference or taste. We don't get to say, well, you like chocolate, I like strawberry, so you like God, I like materialism. That doesn't get us to the right answer as to how we're here, why we're here, and how you can explain the existence of anything in this life. Okay. So Darwinians have the wrong box stop. I think that's the conclusion of this chapter and this section. Darwinian evolution is the wrong box stop. We can't get to life from non-life through their processes. And by their own admission and by their own statements of not having the ability to make all of these complex, compounded probabilities somehow all align perfectly to get even the first life. That doesn't even begin to explain how a single-cell amoeba turned into a human being over 400 million years or whatever the time count is. So, the most rational thing we can do is to rule out, or to recognize that ruling out theism has proven to be both bad philosophy and bad science. The discoverable truths in the world that we live in clearly leads to a theistic worldview box top. Hopefully this section helps to confirm that for you. Okay? That the answers of materialists and secularists and Darwinianists does not really account for who we are and how we got here. Okay? And so we should, by necessity, reject those views. They simply don't explain it. Let me give you a little bit more. That's basically the end of our notes here. I was going to show you a few other images. This is a picture of a cell. Now, when Darwin wrote his theory, he envisioned that the building blocks of life, a cell, which he had no knowledge of in terms of the interior workings of it, was just like protoplasm. Super simple, easily combined, and could just build up life. As I said, this cell is more complex than New York City's entire city management processes. It's got all these different components, all these different parts, and they're all working in their own fashions to just to sustain life. Okay? Hugely complex. We still don't fully understand all the workings of a cell. It's super complex. You can't see the words on the screen, but you can see it's incredibly complex. Right? Every cell of every living thing is in that basic category. The DNA molecule, incredibly complex, right? This fills in these thousands of volumes of encyclopedias worth of information telling us how to build a nose, how to build eyes, how to build brains, how to build, the capacity to process oxygen and food, and how to have reproduction within the species that we live in or the kind that we are. All that information is contained in our DNA. From the moment of fertilization, by the way, sperm and egg come together like in a human reproductive system. All that information to build every aspect of that human being is present at the moment of fertilization. Okay. Talk about proteins. DNA is made of protein. It's the basics of every aspect of life. Okay, and they're not just that DNA and that protein is not just like this sequence. Like we talked about, like 200 chains long. It actually gets folded on top of itself. Okay, and it's the most efficient data storage system man has ever even envisioned, because it reads forwards and backwards and up and down, and then it folds on top of itself, and those folds continue to use the same letters in the sequence to give new instructions through the folding. So as you see on the screen on the left, toxic. If it's misfolded, you get toxicity with the protein. Here's what it looks like unfolded. Well, it's purposeless. It has no value to the living system if it's unfolded. Folded becomes functional. And there's what a protein, the DNA and the molecules and all that begin to build into this functional protein. It's incredibly complex. Mankind can't devise a storage system for our computers and technology that's anywhere close to the density level and efficiency level of the DNA. And that happened by accident, right? No? Okay. Here's just the plasma membrane of a cell. Every cell of our body. It's got to let stuff in, it's got to let stuff out, it's got to protect all of the internal components of the cell. That cell membrane is super easy, right? There's nothing complex about it. It's just a little teeny, like, whatever, something that keeps the cell protected. No, without the cell membrane, the cell would die, would have no capacity for life. It's super easy, right, to build a cell membrane. Okay. Here's a picture of our cardiovascular system. You can look at that and say, oh, that's super easy to build. Obviously, it could happen by accident. And any explosion could produce the human cardiovascular system, right? Trial and error, lots and lots, billions of years of time could easily, eventually, produce the human cardiovascular system, which feeds energy and nutrients to every cell in our body. And without that, we don't have a body and we don't have a life. So, this is what explosions look like. Accidents, randomness looks like. Does that look anything like what we've seen? Okay. How many of you have heard of the golden ratio? Anybody heard the golden ratio? It goes by a couple of different names, but apparently it's 1 plus the square root of 5, and that's that product divided by 2. Mean anything to you? No, not yet. Let me show you why they call it the golden ratio. Because it's really a measure of attractiveness and beauty in many ways. And this concept, the mathematical principles behind it, are seen everywhere when you look for them. Man can do it like with the Eiffel Tower, but it's seen, as you can see, in like the rose petal. It's seen in the Milky Way galaxy, these ratios. It's seen in the ratios of our arm, our fingers, and you see that on the screen? Okay. The golden ratio seems to appear there. It appears in certain sea creatures, these golden ratios. All of that little structure, that little 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2, seen everywhere. Here's more. Golden ratio. Mathematical properties that represent both beauty and creation by non-randomness. Okay, you've heard, the Nautilus shell there in the upper left. Okay, constant over and over and over again of this. Sometimes I think it's referred to also as the Fibonacci sequence, but it's the golden ratio. You see it all over the place. You even see it in the human face, in multiple ways of the human face. The golden ratio of our ears, of our eye to nose ratio, our mouth and chin ratio, our forehead ratio. The golden ratio seems to be everywhere. There's a bigger picture of the Nautilus. Okay. Let me go back to that specifically. I think, it's 1, so in a parentheses, right, so you get the product first. 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2 is called this golden ratio. And then, as you see, like in the Nautilus here, every one of those chambers of the Nautilus follows that mathematical formula. Yeah, that's also in a hurricane forming, right? So let's go back to that. So you see the Nautilus has this ratio, a galaxy has this ratio. I can't remember what kind of sea creature that is, but a hurricane has that ratio, a sunflower has that ratio, a regular, I think, mollusk here, shell has that ratio. People, mathematicians and scientists, pick up things all around the universe, and they go, gosh, it has the same exact sequence over and over and over and over again. That's all accident, right? All of these different things just decided the golden ratio is the way to build things. Well, but things don't decide for themselves. Thoughtless, mindless things don't make decisions. Something has decided that this is how he wants beauty to be represented in the world. Do you see that? Okay, you can find, you go ahead, Google on your own. You'll Google the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequence, look for images and pictures. You'll see just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples in creation that match this exact mathematical principle or formula. Why? If it's all a world of randomness and accident and chance and time, why? Well, I had a couple of short little YouTube, well, not entirely short, but a couple short little YouTube videos I was going to show you. It's in the notes. You're welcome to go look at those on your own. I'll just say one is on the bacterial flagellum. That's one that Michael Behe really focused on about 25 years ago or more. This design structure of the rotor and the stator and all of that propels the bacterial flagellum through its watery environment or liquid environment. Really interesting little video there. There's lots of different ones you could watch if you just Google bacterial flagellum. And then this DNA animation, this video, actually this video doesn't have any words in it, it just shows you. Watch how DNA interacts with itself in the cell in this video. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So if I had time, I'd show it to you tonight. I can't show it to people online, but you can look at it online if you're looking at the notes, or you can do this on your own if you want to take a look at it. Really just, I think, very impressive, screams there is a designer who built the designs of the world that we live in. So with that, I will let you guys all go and meet you next week, or Sunday, or whatever works. Thank you.